Good evening, everyone. It's Paul Kagabine here at the Garland County Library, and I'm here with the wonderful Biddy Martin, who's the author of the recently released Snake Eyes Murder in a Southern Town, which has been very popular, not just here locally in Hot Springs, but across the country, getting rave reviews and feedback. And Biddy is going to tell us all about how life has been for her since release, and we might hear a little bit about what she has coming up and hear some more behind the scenes details about Snake Eyes and her writing process. But she's got a great presentation for us this evening. And if you are watching live, I strongly encourage you to ask questions for Biddy, and we'll get those answered live after her presentation here in a moment. But Biddy, welcome. It's good to have you as always. Oh, you are muted.
Thank you, Paul.
So,
Thank you for inviting me tonight to talk about my book.
of course, I look forward to hearing what you've been up to and how your release has gone. It's been just under a month. It came out on the 15th last month.
Yes, it did.
Excellent. And I know it's been very popular at the library here alone. We have a waiting list, I think, high double digits. I'd have to check, but everyone's asking about it, and you're going to tell us all about it.
Thank you so much, Paul.
You're
It
welcome.
was exciting to be on the library's list. I'm going to pull up my book cover here. There we go. Thank you. Yeah, it was pretty exciting to be on the library's top requested list for a few weeks before and after the book came out, and that I can't thank everybody enough for wanting to read Snake Eyes Murder in a Southern Town. It was released, like Paul said, on May 15th by Prometheus Books and is available at all major bookstores, Wordsworth Books in Little Rock, Target, and Amazon. The book would have never happened without my agent, Linda, in New York, and Jake Bonar, the acquisitions editor at Roman and Littlefield Publishers, who from the get-go believed in this story. Jake said, "I really enjoyed reading the manuscript, compelling, comprehensive, and meticulously researched. The letters and quotes you include paint such a vivid picture of Hot Springs and all the people in the book. I was typing characters, but of course they are real people, yes, but even more so, you do a great job of humanizing the names on the pages, especially Frank Davis." My author's note appears before the first chapter. It says, "This true story was told with the help of microfilm, newspaper articles, cemetery records, historical papers, and maps from the Garland County Historical Society, my and others' personal memorabilia, documents from the Garland County Circuit Court Clerk's Office, internet searches, email documents, copyrighted crime scene photographs by Bill Deaver, prison files from the Arkansas Department of Corrections, historical Blacksnake Ranch real estate documents from the current owner, Frank Davis's personal prison files, and interviews with more than 60 persons. The names were changed for 9 people to protect their anonymity or memory. However, the rest are as they appeared in public accounts or were allowed by personal permission." The book begins with our junior high school friend, Kathy Ward, who dies while horseback riding with some girlfriends at Blacksnake Ranch. It was the mid-1960s, and although Hot Springs had bright flashing neon lights on Central Avenue, we lived in a different world in our quiet residential neighborhoods. Kathy's death disturbed us kids and stunned our parents and others who didn't even know her. A junior high school Y-teen dance was in full swing on Friday night when a rumor of Kathy's death swept through the gymnasium. Many didn't believe it, and a few decided to call and see if she was home. The next morning, the newspaper reported Kathy was apparently dragged to death by a horse she was riding when her foot caught in a stirrup. That's all we knew, because our parents didn't talk about Kathy's death, nor did our school teachers. We began hearing rumors at school that she'd been raped and murdered, and we were scared. We didn't know our parents and the community were skeptical of Davis's story. Some knew he was a skilled horseman and could have caught a runaway horse. Others knew he had a fast reputation. They felt Kathy's death was suspicious and began pointing fingers at him. 6 months later, Frank Davis made front page news when he murdered a woman at the Redbird Laundromat on Central Avenue. It was frightening, and everyone in town was terrified of him. Of course, us kids didn't read the newspaper, and all we knew is what we heard in the hallways at school. Every teenager in Hot Springs knew about Kathy Ward's tragedy. They may not have known her personally, but they did know about the girl who died at Blacksnake Ranch. We didn't know what happened to the ranch owner, Frank Davis, or if he was ever accused of Kathy's murder. We finished school, went off to college, married, and enjoyed life, but we never forgot Kathy. She was always with us like a spare tire in a car. I lived life with gusto, and my employment proved it. I worked in research, management, advertising, marketing, and was part of the Little Rock media community at the Arkansas Times Magazine, KATV Channel 7, and the Arkansas Democrat Gazette. In the 90s, I decided to return to college for a degree in nursing, and during that time, I began writing TV scripts for fun and then moved on to books. By happenstance, I crossed paths with a Little Rock woman accused of murdering her husband. I knew he'd grown up in Hot Springs. I pursued that story with a writing partner, and we spent 3 years and 2 murder trials on the high-profile case. The first trial was a hung jury, and the second was an acquittal. It was a juicy story with lots of media coverage and great sound bites. My writing partner and I completed the book and had interest from Unsolved Mysteries. Now, our agent also received an offer to option our manuscript for a movie of the week, but that ended in a contract stalemate. While I was working on that book, I went outside one morning to get the newspaper in my front yard, and I saw a huge axe stuck in a tree. I knew someone involved with the murder case was sending me a message, but I didn't let it scare me. I just grabbed the axe and took it inside my house and stuck it in a coat closet, and then it finally wound up in my garage. My writing was pushed aside as I concentrated on my nursing career as a traveling operating room nurse, which took me from Madison to Manhattan and Boston to the Bay. And everywhere I went, Kathy was riding shotgun with me. In 2014, I was working in New York when I called my childhood neighbor, Leslie. I told her I was coming home for 2 weeks and wanted to see if I could find out anything about Kathy on the microfilm at the library. Leslie told me she wanted to go, and then she told me a secret she'd kept since Kathy died. I began my search in August 2014 when I was home for 2 weeks in between contracts at a New York hospital. Leslie went with me to the library to help me look through the microfilm, but we didn't know when Kathy died. We knew it was sometime in junior high school, so we asked for those years. We looked through the stacks of reels, but couldn't find anything about Kathy. I would still be looking if it hadn't been for Greg Wallace at the library's research department. He told me to go to the Garland County Historical Society. He said they had old funeral home records. I did what he said, and one of the volunteers found gross mortuary records with Kathy's death date. Donnie, the volunteer, told me she died on June 24th, 1966, and her parents were Dr. Hiram Ward and Sarah Jenkins Ward. He showed me another piece of paper and said she's buried in Murfreesboro, Arkansas. Thanks to Greg and the Historical Society, I now had a starting point. Kathy's death date was discovered on a Friday, the same day she died in 1966. On Saturday, I asked Leslie to go with me on a drive to find Blacksnake Ranch. Just as we were about to turn off Mountain Pine Road onto Blacksnake Road, I spotted a sign for Ward's Country Store. I asked Leslie, what are the odds on that right here after all these years? We knew no one from Kathy's family lived in Hot Springs anymore and agreed it was a crazy coincidence. In between cups of coffee and the Sunday newspaper, I began thinking about the search for Kathy and the secret Leslie told me. She said Kathy left her skateboard at her house 5 days before she died, and she's had it ever since. Leslie thought she'd lost it, but her handyman Mike found it up in the attic. I asked her what day he found it, and she didn't know, but she said she wrote him a check and she'd look to see the date. Leslie said, I'll text it to you. I grabbed my cell phone and started scrolling through Leslie's texts and stopped when I found it. She had simply written a date, June 24th, 2014. I looked at the date again and couldn't believe it. Kathy's skateboard had mysteriously reappeared on the 48th anniversary of her death. And that's when I knew Kathy wanted this story told. Kathy's father was a doctor in Murfreesboro and agreed to an interview in his home. It was the day after I made the connection to Kathy's skateboard, and I was still a bit rattled. When I met him, I thought he looked like Gregory Peck in To Kill a Mockingbird, tall and in command. Dr. Ward told me everything he remembered about Kathy's sudden death and threw in nuggets of extraneous information that I'd spend years trying to find. Before I headed back to Hot Springs, I went to the cemetery where Dr. Ward said Kathy was buried in the family plot. On the way there, I couldn't help thinking about a school paper I was told Kathy had written 2 years before she died when she was a fifth grader at Jones School in Hot Springs. She said, "My father is a doctor, but my parents are divorced and I miss him. I like it here now that I'm making friends, but I don't like being here." Sadly, I thought, now she's only blocks away from her father forever. He would live 55 years longer than Kathy until his death in 2021 at the age of 95. Kathy was born a year after her father completed medical school and probably lived like a little princess in Murfreesboro, where being a physician's daughter was like being royalty. Then when she turned 6 years old, her mother, Sarah Ward, brought her to Hot Springs along with her 2 siblings. It was probably hard for Kathy to fit in with the other kids who had fathers at the supper table every night, but she kept it quiet about her parents. Many of us didn't know they were divorced because that just wasn't common back then. Kathy's 38-year-old mother was attractive and frequented the clubs and casinos with her many dates. Kathy suffered a dysfunctional home life, but just as she turned 13 years old in April 1966, her life was on the upswing. She had blossomed into a beautiful young teenager, was part of the in crowd, and although she attended Central Junior High School, she was now dating the quarterback at Southwest Junior High School across town. Kathy begged her mother to go horseback riding at Blacksnake Ranch with her girlfriends throughout the school year, but she always said no. Then, for some unknown reason, 3 weeks after Kathy finished the 7th grade, Sarah Ward gave her permission to go horseback riding with them on June 24th, 1966. Frank Davis was 42 years old, married to his 4th wife, and the father of 2 young boys when Kathy Ward died on his property at Blacksnake Ranch. He had a history of barroom brawls and a mother who pampered him with her pocketbook. Frank was trying hard to be a decent family man now, but he was sweating out the authorities' investigation of Kathy's accident, and maybe his wife and children suffered. 19 days after Kathy's death, the authorities confirmed it had resulted from a riding accident. Frank Davis was cleared of any wrongdoing, but other problems were brewing in his personal life. Just 46 days after Kathy's death, something happened that threw him into a tailspin. Frank Davis's life had turned upside down. He was used to getting his way, and when he didn't, he relied on his mother. But this time, she couldn't fix his problem, and he was about to explode. It all came to a head on January 19th, 1967, at the Redbird Laundromat on Central Avenue, when Frank committed a murder in cold blood. But this time, there were witnesses. 5 days later, Davis was charged with first-degree murder. His mother hired him 2 attorneys, Robert Ridgway from Hot Springs and Little Rock's high-priced Jack Holt. They entered a plea of innocent by reason of insanity and asked for a reduction of the charge to second-degree murder on the grounds the state's evidence had failed to establish necessary premeditation. Municipal Judge Earl Mazander thought otherwise and overruled their request. 3 months after the Redbird Laundromat murder, authorities took a second look at Kathy's accidental death and discovered evidence during a grand jury trial that proved Davis had murdered Kathy. He was charged with her murder, but the state decided to put her trial on the back burner while he was in the process of being tried for the second murder. Davis would spend the next 18 months bouncing back and forth between the Garland County Jail and the state hospital. He told the psychiatrist spooky stories such as hearing people in his home at night and how people would follow him around town and flash lights in his eyes. He bragged that he would have made a great astronaut and that he had a photographic memory. He claimed to have burned down a Texas jailhouse when he was 7 years old to free a cowboy friend of his. But one thing he never admitted was murdering a single soul. He thought he was being evaluated for his ongoing stomach problems that began during his service in World War II. Somehow, he didn't make the connection between the recent murder and his incarceration, or else he had another talent as a movie actor. Different ones in Hot Springs had wild stories about Frank Davis. His second wife said he slashed all 4 of her tires on her first attempt to leave him. She made sure he wasn't home on the next and made a clean departure from their marriage. She never wanted anything to do with him. And although she was still alive during the writing of the book, I respected her privacy and never contacted her. 3 of Frank Davis's wives escaped him and hid away from the man they had once loved. He frightened them, and now he had terrorized Hot Springs. He was considered a cold-blooded killer who created fear in children and even grown men. I've had discussions about the silence after Kathy Ward's death, and I believe it was because our parents and the community were afraid of Frank Davis, what he might do if he heard his name was being muddied. Maybe they thought he'd come after them. Betty Jo Tucker and Kathy Ward had been best friends since the 5th grade. They and some other girls had been invited by a friend to go horseback riding at Blacksnake Ranch on Friday, June 24th, 1966. Betty Jo's daddy knew Frank Davis and wouldn't give her permission to go. Mr. Tucker didn't like Davis, and he didn't want his only child around the man. Betty Jo begged her father, but he wouldn't give in. She sulked all day, feeling left out while her friends had fun at the ranch. That night, her father received a phone call from his cousin who worked with Dr. Ward in Murfreesboro. She knew Kathy was good friends with Betty Jo and wanted to tell him about Kathy's fatal accident. Mr. Tucker hated to tell Betty Jo, but he knew she needed to know. Of course, Betty Jo's world was turned upside down. Although she wasn't with Kathy when she died, I truly believe Betty Jo suffered survivor's guilt. She always felt that if she'd been there, Kathy might still be alive today. Betty Jo was affected by Kathy's death so profoundly that she can't remember what happened to the girl who had invited all of them to the ranch that day. She has no memory of the girl from that day forward. And as life plays its little tricks, Betty Jo would marry a young man whose father had served as a juror in Frank Davis's murder trial. Betty Jo's father came from Kirby, Arkansas, only 15 miles from Murfreesboro in Pike County. She had researched her family tree in the 1900 census and discovered her and Kathy's great grandfathers lived close to each other. Betty Jo said, "My great grandparents were Francis Ward and William W. Williams. Francis died, but William is living almost next to Samuel J. Ward, Kathy's great grandfather. Families often live close to each other, so now I'm wondering if our Ward families are connected. What a tangled web of circumstances." Another strange connection would happen years after Kathy's death when her father, Dr. Ward, would marry his third wife, the cousin of Betty Jo's father. What tops it all is that Betty Jo discovered a Davis connection. She was researching the 1940 U.S. Census and saw that her father was living with his grandaunt in Hot Springs on Henderson Street. Their home was in the same block by Earl Peck, who owned the Redbird Laundromat when Frank Davis committed the murder in 1967. Oddly, I found a Redbird Bermuda Triangle in that neighborhood with Peek's home at 136 Henderson. Irene Davis, Frank Davis's mother, lived down the street on the corner of Henderson and Bell Streets, and the Redbird victims' aunt and uncle, the Charlie Fagers, lived only a block away from Irene Davis on the corner of Bell and Oaklawn. That means Betty Jo's father had lived within the Redbird Bermuda Triangle 2 decades earlier. But the kicker was his Aunt Molly had divorced her husband, Charlie Wesley Davis. I received a phone call from a friend who'd read the book, and she wanted to know about a story in chapter 4 about the man who was by Oaklawn School and called 2 teenagers over to his red truck. He told them he'd found a lost puppy and was trying to find the owners. Their grandmother shouted from her nearby home just as the girls realized what the man was doing inside the truck. A few weeks later, one of the girls read about Kathy's death at Blacksnake Ranch and was convinced the man in the red truck had been the ranch owner, Frank Davis. The friend who called me asked if I had changed up the story a bit and used fictitious names in my book. And I told her no, they were real names and nothing was changed. It was a true account. The friend said she and another girl had experienced the same thing in the same Oaklawn neighborhood when they were walking from Oaklawn School to a lunch spot. She said the man called them over to his truck and it looked like he was doing something. Her friend said, "Come on, let's get out of here." They walked into the lunch spot and told some of the kids about the man. And she said later at school, some of the kids teased them and said they'd had hot dogs for lunch. She told me that after she read my story in the book about the man in the red truck, she called the girl who'd been with her back then and asked her if she remembered the color of the man's truck who had called them over in grade school. Her friend said, "Red." My friend continued to tell me her story, explaining her young innocence and how she didn't quite understand what happened that day. She said she sure didn't tell her mother, but the next day, she and her friend were called over the school's overhead speakers to go to the principal's office. When she arrived, she saw her mother and two men who were introduced as the FBI and police. They told the girls they'd been following the man that they had seen the day before. This event happened to the two girls a year before Kathy Ward was murdered at Blacksnake Ranch by Frank Davis. And it bears a strong resemblance to his actions a year later when he was cruising the same Oaklawn School neighborhood for little girls and stopped the teenager and her cousin only a few weeks before Kathy's death. If only the authorities had nailed him. I was leaving after a long program by local authors at the library in early May this year when a woman stopped me and wanted to talk. After she introduced herself, my jaw dropped as she said, "I'm Sarah Ward's cousin." She explained that she was from El Dorado, and when she mentioned her maiden name, I knew, in fact, she and Sarah were kin. She told me that she and her husband had purchased a lake house in Hot Springs over 20 years ago, but they weren't here full time until last year. I couldn't believe it when she told me their lake address because they lived directly across the road from a close friend of mine. All these years, I visited my friend on the lake, and Kathy Ward's kinfolk had been right under my nose. The cousin invited me to her lake home the following week and showed me photos of Kathy's mother that had been taken long after Kathy was gone. She explained their extended family's dynamics and said she was much younger than her cousin Sarah Ward, but only 10 years older than Kathy. She said she didn't really remember Kathy or her siblings when her El Dorado family drove up to visit Sarah Ward in Murfreesboro when she was a teenager. She said they went to Camp Albert Pike. I remember Kathy's brother mentioning how his mother would take them on trips to Camp Albert Pike after they had moved to Hot Springs. Maybe it was her way of dredging up good family memories of bygone days. The cousin said she had Kathy's little sister's phone number and wanted to call her to see if she would be coming to my book signing on May 22nd. She emailed me later that night and said Kathy's little sister was coming and she sure looked forward to seeing her. I was so happy to think that the book was bringing the Ward family together 56 years after Kathy's death. At the end of that week, Frank Davis's fourth child was in Hot Springs and we visited. I had interviewed him in February 2019 when he'd been in Arkansas, and I'd kept up with him and his wife. He told me then how he despised Frank Davis and had driven to Texas to spit on his grave. I can't imagine what a life he's had, facing the truth about his father's crimes, one of which was the murder of his very own mother, with him right beside her in the arms of his maternal grandmother as they sat in the front seat of the car. He was only 10 months old when that happened, and his mother's family raised him from that day forward. They did an excellent job, and he's turned out amazing. But he's still followed by a black cloud called Frank Davis. It began in his childhood when people in Hot Springs would steer clear of him when they heard his name. I knew he was still fighting the memory of those experiences when I invited him and his wife to my book signing less than 10 days away. He asked if anyone who had known his father would be at the book signing. I told him maybe one person, but she may not be there. He was leery about coming because he resembles his father. And I told him, no one is responsible for the actions of their parents, and you can't be held accountable for your father's crimes. I was taking care of last minute items, picking up lanyards at Bill Hall Printers for the Historical Society team who'd be working my book signing in 2 days on Sunday, May 22nd. Everything was coming together and friends and family were arriving from out of state. I was scheduled to tour some Tennessee friends around Hot Springs and pick them up at their hotel late Saturday morning. We hadn't been 45 minutes into our drive when we were rear ended. Two of us received sea collars at the scene of the accident and had to be checked out at the ER, which turned into a long afternoon sitting in the waiting room. That night, I was thinking about the accident and I was grateful that none of us sustained major injuries, but I couldn't help but question how I'd traveled close to 20 years around the country as a traveling operating room nurse and was never in a motor vehicle accident. Yet the day before my book signing, I'm sitting at a stoplight and I get rammed by another car in my own hometown, Hot Springs. That night, I thought about the incident and I was sure I knew who had been behind the wheel of that car. It was Frank Davis, the murderer in my book, coming after me a day before my book signing. I woke up Sunday morning with just a hint of pain in my lower back, but I had no time to worry because the lanyards had to be put together and what few books I had for sale had to be organized into boxes. I'd already rounded up the other items, such as bookmarks, that would be given out by the book signing team. I wound up hosting an impromptu pizza party at my house for my family and friends who came to help tote everything to the Central Theater for the book signing. I missed out being with my college sorority sisters who's driven down from Northwest Arkansas and were stopping for lunch at Squeezebox Pizza prior to their arrival at the book signing. By that time, the greeters and the Historical Society team were in place at their different posts, and Chris Ricks had the 1966 hits booming overhead at the Central Theater. Folks were streaming in, and MC Bob Clements was ready to start the program at 2:30. I stepped out from backstage when Bob introduced me and couldn't believe the crowd that had shown up. The spotlight was blinding me, so I held my script above my eyes so I could look around the room. Months earlier, when I was scouting the theater, I counted the seats and came up with 333. I could tell that a good portion of them were full and was glad that so many people had come to the special celebration of this true Hot Springs story. I knew how much it meant to me and several others, but never expected a turnout like this. I announced friends who had flown in from California, Colorado, Tennessee, Georgia, and others who'd driven from around the state, like my college friends. Of course, the bulk of the crowd was good old Hot Springs natives who had lived this story. I mentioned the storm we had Saturday night that interrupted the TV show I'd been watching. The lightning had jumbled up the pixels on the screen, and it made me think of the time Leslie and I had gone to Kathy's grave with her childhood skateboard for the very first time. We took pictures of us holding it, and when we saw the second photo of Leslie standing at Kathy's headstone with her skateboard, we were stunned. The pixels in the photo were distorted like the TV screen. A black shadow started at Kathy's headstone and rose up next to Leslie as if a person was standing beside her. We knew Kathy was with us that day. That was my introduction to Leslie, who had kept Kathy's memory alive all these years through her childhood skateboard. Leslie came up on stage with a huge shopping bag strapped over her shoulder. Leslie was emotional as she began to talk. She said, "I'm nervous and not a public speaker, so I'm just going to speak from my heart. That's where Kathy's been buried for 56 years. She described Kathy and then said, I can still hear her voice. It was so sweet, and she didn't have a mean bone in her body. Kathy and I had big dreams back then when we used to skateboard together. We had these big dreams that we were going to go out to California when we turned 18 and be surfer girls. And we got to thinking, we don't have an ocean here. How are we going to practice? And I said, well, skateboards. It's the same principle. You have a foot here and one up there and the arm motion and balance. So we practiced every day because we knew that's what we were going to do. Obviously, those dreams didn't work out. Leslie went on to say, since the last day I saw her, I've had her skateboard and I've kept that for 56 years. It went everywhere with me. I moved and then I moved out of state and it went with me. I kept it, but one day the skateboard went missing. It broke my heart. Then I had to have some handiwork done, and the handyman Mike asked me if I knew there was a skateboard up in the attic. I thought it must have been one of my kids, but when he brought the skateboard down, I grabbed it, I hugged it, and I started bawling. It was just not any skateboard. It was Kathy's skateboard. I don't know how it got up there, but it did. And I want to thank Mike because without him, I don't think you would be here today. That skateboard would probably still be up there in my attic. I happened to tell Biddy about it, and she asked what day he found it. I told her I'd written him a check, and I'd find the date, and it was June 24th, the day that Kathy was murdered. And I want to thank Biddy for her insight, determination, and the will to put this book together. She's fixed a big hole that's been in my ship. Betty Jo Tucker had come all the way from Georgia to attend the book signing in honor of her childhood friend, Kathy Ward. I saw her when she arrived at the theater before the program, and she told me that she had to choose between her Hot Springs High School class reunion in April or the book signing in May, and she had no doubt which one she would attend. I invited her on stage, and she said, I did not plan something to say, but I want to thank Biddy so much. There's been a hole in my heart since my good friend Kathy died. And if you've never experienced that, especially as a young child, 12, you don't know how it's going to affect you for your life. The first thing I ever told my husband was about Kathy Ward and what she meant to me and how much her death meant to the whole community and what a big loss it was. So when Biddy called me and wanted to talk about it, well, the river started flowing. I started crying and the messages started flying back and forth between us. And I had saved almost everything I had from Kathy. Just like Leslie saved the skateboard, I saved my memories. And so I want to thank Biddy over and over and over again for filling the hole that's been left in our hearts all these years for those who loved Kathy. The audience was quiet as they listened to two other speakers, Margie Hill, who knew Frank Davis and had also heard some crazy stories about Davis from her husband and uncle, Bill Deaver, who photographed the Redbird Laundromat crime scene photographs, came up on stage and spoke. Some of his copyrighted photos are in the book. I began calling off names from an index that included people from Hot Springs by their page appearance in the book. Gail Rader, page 3, Mike Langley, page 6, Mitzi, page 10, Mary Claire, page 11, and then I said Jan Johnson, page 11, and asked her to come up on stage. She had flown in from Colorado just for the book signing and shared her memories about the frightening rumor of Kathy's death that raced through the Friday night Y-Teen dance in 1966. I didn't recognize two people in the audience who were undoubtedly affected by Frank Davis's crimes the most. They were family members of both murder victims and were sitting in different sections, only 6 rows apart. Neither knew the other was there, and I didn't either. I knew Kathy's little sister had come from out of town, but while I was on stage, I didn't know if the other victim's son had arrived from out of state. I saw him after the book signing, and by that time, Kathy's little sister was gone. They both explained how the book has opened up their past. They're working through a lot of painful memories and seeing the whole picture now. I wish I could tell you what they've shared with me, but I can't. They're still processing the past to the present. I had planned a special ending for the program and told the audience the story that's been waiting a lifetime has finally been told, and I thank each of you for coming to celebrate. But today also serves as our closure. Only 3 people I interviewed remembered attending Kathy's funeral. The rest of us didn't get our chance to say goodbye. So now we're going to do that thanks to David Weiss's arrangement for the Nashville Backup Singers Community Cell Phone Virtual Choir. We also want to remember Sharon Knight Davis, the second victim in the book, because if it hadn't been for her, Kathy's murder would never have been recognized. Sharon got her husband, Frank Davis, from the grave, and she's the one who made sure the authorities knew Kathy had been murdered, that it wasn't an accident. The audience waited as Chris Ricks keyed up the choir's song. The crowd was silent as they listened to It Is Well With My Soul and looked at Kathy's 7th-grade photo on the screen. When the song ended, MC Bob Clements closed the program with information about the book, which was scarce in Hot Springs. Many had brought their pre-ordered copies, and others wanted to purchase one. He said, the books are available at all major bookstores and Books A Million in Hot Springs. If you can't get your book signed today, Biddy will be available to sign them every Monday from 10 o'clock until 1 o'clock at the Historical Society at 328 Quapaw. Just like we do every year, Leslie, Mitzi, and I will be visiting Kathy's grave on June 24th. This year will be the 56th anniversary of her murder. And for the first time ever, we'll be meeting some of Kathy's family in Murfreesboro on this very special day. The main goal of my writing this book was to give Kathy back her life, to ensure that our 13-year-old friend would never be forgotten. I'm so glad her story is finally being told. It took 8 years of determination and sheer luck for this book to be picked up by my agent Linda and Jake, my acquisitions editor at Roman and Littlefield. They are the reason the story is being told, and although they don't know it, one of the most gratifying results of the book is that it's caused both victims' families to heal, along with many others who've lived this sad, true story. And I have to say that this story also would have never been told, and people here in Hot Springs would have never wanted to hear about it or read the book if it hadn't been for Paul Kegelbein and the library inviting me to speak at the book festival back in April. And they've been a big supporter of the book, and I can't thank them enough. Paul, thank you so much for being a big part of this book, and I think you're wonderful, and thank you.
All right, back at you, Biddy. That was very riveting, and I just also want to say this is the third time I've heard you give a presentation about your book, and in case you had any doubt, you keep getting smoother and smoother each time you give it when it comes to giving a sample of the book and sharing all the behind-the-scenes work that went into it. So,
well, thank you so much.
absolutely. So I have several questions for you, and I want to encourage our live audience to share your questions, or just if you have comments or little stories you'd like to share with Biddy before we wrap up this evening, please do so. But I want you to, Biddy, share your overall feelings. You discussed it there quite a bit, but just in a nutshell, what your feelings are about the reception that your book has received in the last few weeks.
I've been knocked over, I'll tell you the truth. I just can't believe all the kind words that I've been hearing from all over the country. I've been receiving emails. People have been texting me. I have friends from around the state that said they'll be watching tonight, but I just never expected that people who have never even been to Hot Springs have read the book, and they've loved it. I was talking to Leslie today, who's in the book, and she said, Biddy, I haven't talked to one person who's had a bad thing to say about your book. Everybody loves it. And it's sad to say that they love a true crime, but this story is very riveting. And I guess it's the characters. It's just Hot Springs. It's one of our many stories, and I feel very privileged to have written it.
Do you have a favorite review or piece of praise that you've heard?
Oh, golly gee. I don't know. There's so many. I'd hate to pick one, but I did receive a nice email from a man from Hot Springs who said that in 1966 he was in college, but that summer when Kathy died, that summer, that he was going to Little Rock to take some summer courses because he went to school out of state. And he said, I never knew anything about this story. And he went on to tell what he did. It was rather humorous. But he also missed out on the Redbird laundromat murder, but he said he can't believe that all this happened in Hot Springs and how much he really enjoyed reading the book. And he's a doctor up in DC, and he has a wonderful family here in Hot Springs. And I will say his brother's on the Historical Society board with me. I'm just wondering, that was so sweet of him to write that email to me.
Let's see. Karen with a Y says, thank you, Biddy. And Shirley says, enjoyed your presentation so much.
Thank you.
Reading the book now and really enjoying it.
Thank you so much.
Karen with an E says, great presentation. I'm loving the book.
Thank you, Karen.
And Judy says, bravo, Biddy. I know how hard you worked on bringing this story to life. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I will say, Paul, that at the end of my presentation, I did say how Bob Clements told everybody at the book signing that they could come by the Historical Society every Monday from 10 o'clock till 1 o'clock, and I'll sign their copies, because we didn't get a lot of books signed at the book signing. It was pretty crowded, and a lot of people opted out of that, and I didn't blame them. But
and it probably takes forever with you because you personalize all your signings.
I did. You're right. I did. You're right about that. But this Monday was my first Monday back at the Historical Society because we were closed on Memorial Day. And there was a steady string of people coming in. It was so wonderful to see everybody and get to visit with them. And so if you have a book and you want to get it signed, come on by on Monday from 10 o'clock to 1 o'clock at the Historical Society. And I'd love to see you. Thank you.
Of course. So you had to talk to a lot of people when preparing for this book. Approximately how many individuals would you say you had to talk to while doing your research?
Over 60 people. Well, more than that. Actually, those are the interviews, more than that, because you can look back in the acknowledgments in the back of the book, and there's several pages long. I talked to more people than I interviewed. I'll put it that way, because I interviewed 60 people, but I talked to much more than that. And all their names are in the back of the book. And I will say this book would have never happened if it hadn't been for all those people whose names are written in the acknowledgments in the back of the book. And I can't thank them enough also.
What was the biggest challenge when it came to interacting with and interviewing these people?
I think in probably a lot of people that interview folks for books or whatever, I think that you come in with some expectations of what you want people to say. And then when they don't say it, it's kind of a letdown. But then there are others who you're just, you can't believe what all they've told you. And I had some of that, but not a lot. But that's one thing that I found.
Absolutely. And you mentioned there's quite a few people that you would have liked to have spoken to who are deceased. And
yes, and there are some people that I'm going to be talking to in the future. And I can't reveal that, but there are some that I am going to be talking to in the future, and I can't wait for that to happen.
Yeah, I'm
Hmm.
sure that this release has brought a lot of opportunities that come out of the woodwork and want to share the information they have in relation to it.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
know. Will any of that be included in the second edition?
I'm not sure. I don't know if my editor is going to allow me to add on to the book.
Hmm. So
Uh,
mainly edits instead of content additions.
well, I am starting tomorrow. I'm going to be going through and finding any corrections that needed to be made for the second printing, which will be coming up soon. And my twin is also putting together an index, which people I'm sure noticed there wasn't an index in the back of the book. That's my fault because I didn't realize that was my responsibility to write an index. I thought the publisher did that because how would I know what page they were going to fall on? And
Fair enough.
then when I thought to ask my production editor, she said, "Well, no, you should have done that, and we can include that in the second printing." So I'm so grateful to my twin Mitzi, who's at home working on a spreadsheet, and she's fixing and adding names and going through. And so we're going to have an index thanks to Mitzi. Thank you, Mitzi.
I got another comment. Tansel says, fabulous presentation for an outstanding book.
Well, thank you, Tansel.
So, did anyone along the way take opposition to the fact that you were working on this book or try to stop you from including anything?
Well, there's a little situation that happened, but I can't talk about it now because I just found out about it at my book signing, and we're going to get that resolved. But it's somebody told me that someone would not talk to me, but as it turns out, yes, they would talk to me, and I am going to be talking to them. So that's that's the only opposition I got.
Other than getting hit by the car.
Well, that too, and I sure will be glad if I ever get my car back. I sure miss it.
So, what did you find to be more challenging? Was it writing about when it came to the emotional aspect or the research?
Well, I love research. So, I mean, I love every minute of the research. So that was fun. And I love writing. But the hardest part of the book was actually the very beginning of it. And that's the problem I have. I've written another book. I've written two actually, other than this one. And it's always the beginning of the book that is the problem to me because then it all just flows from there. So that's my biggest obstacle.
Did you have a vision of how you wanted everything to end up when you started, or did that kind of come along?
No, I knew exactly how it was going to flow, but it was just where do I start the story? To me, that's the hardest part. I don't know if other authors have that problem, but that's what I've always had with the book is where to start the story. So,
What was your workflow like? Did you write large chunks of content at once, or did they come together little by little over time?
when I started working on this project, I was still working as an operating room nurse. So I would be either up in New York or out in California. And so I wasn't able to work on it until I would come home for a few weeks. And so while I was home, I would grab interviews and do some research. And then when I would go back on the road, I would work on that material. So it really, my job interfered with my book. And that's why finally I had to quit working. I had to just retire from nursing. Of course, I was definitely retirement age, but I would have never gotten this book written if I hadn't stopped and just concentrated on it. And so that's what I did.
Another comment from Sherry who says, great job, Biddy.
Thank you, Sherry.
And I do want to give another call for any comments or questions of any kind for Biddy. But before we end, I still have a few more questions for her. But if anyone wants to break the ice on that, you're welcome to. Um, so you took to talk quite a bit about how this writing process has been really cathartic for obtaining closure with Kathy and everyone. Have anything else you'd like to say on that?
No, but I will tell you that I really can't wait for June 24th to come around, because I can't wait to get out there to Kathy's grave, and her little sister's going to be meeting us that day, and their cousin. And that's going to be a really important day. And I don't know what's going to happen, but I know something's going to happen. So I'll let you know about it, Paul.
Did you ever think about taking up skateboarding as a hobby in Kathy's memory?
Never, never.
Never.
Although I'd love
No, it's
to.
not too late. It's not too late.
I don't think I'm too old to go skateboarding, but I do wear her necklace, and I have it on tonight. The skateboard necklace that I wear every time I make a presentation for the book. I always have on Kathy's skateboard necklace. Thank you for asking, Paul.
Of course, of course. Did you have to do anything to mentally prepare before each writing session? Was there a certain space you like to go to, or did it just vary?
I have a wonderful study in my home. So I get up in the morning on one end of my house, and I go down to the other end of the house to my study and work there all day and sometimes into the night. And I love it. And I love my home, and I love my study, and that's where I work. Mhm.
And just so everyone knows, this is not a look into Biddy's home. This is a green screen behind her. But
I wish it was my home. Thank you for my new home, Paul.
of course, of course. So don't try and rob her of that piano there in the background. So do you have any general advice for any ambitious nonfiction writers, especially true crime ones?
They have to be really committed to the story, and they have to work their tails off. I hate to say it, but you really have to work hard. And you just I've learned so much in writing this book that if I do write another true crime, I think, well, golly gee, that's going to be easy, because this was my dry run on this book. So it just they have to document everything. And whenever you interview somebody, I've realized this: just let them talk, don't interrupt them. That was one of my biggest mistakes. So just let them talk, and then when they're finished talking, then ask them the questions that you want to know, but just be quiet. Hmm.
And I'll take this moment to mention about a month and a couple weeks ago, we had Local Author Day, which was a great success. And a lot of the authors got up who participated and had booths at that event, and they gave little spiels about their work. So I'm going to share that video in the comments. So if you'd like to check that out later, if you missed that event, you can check out. There were about 30 local authors who participated, including Biddy. She's not in the video here, but she had a booth, and we were glad to have you and all the other authors as part of it. A huge variety, all kinds of genres, some other true crime ones,
Yes.
children's authors, everything in between. So what untold story about Hot Springs would you like to see written?
Are you asking me?
Mhm.
I don't know. I'm reading a book. I'm reading Orville Albritton's book, Leo and Vern, and I'm getting a lot of ideas from that. And I can't answer you right now, Paul, and I hate to be that way, but I love history, and I think that's why I'm so involved in the Historical Society, and then writing this vintage true crime, because I've always said I wish I could go back in a portal of time here in Hot Springs, like back in the 50s or even the 60s, just for a day and just see what it's like in Hot Springs. So I don't know what's on the horizon. I can't tell you.
But might be a book for you to write.
You're right.
And then speaking of other mediums, of course, everyone wants to know, was there a TV miniseries or a movie in the works? Has that been in discussion?
Well, back in December, Publishers Weekly ran a review on my book, and the day that it came out, I received an email from a Hollywood producer, which I forwarded to my agent. And I asked her last week about it. She says, "Oh, the things like that take a long time, foreign rights and movies." So who knows? If something happens, that'd be great. I've been told this would make a good movie, and that Frank Davis, every leading man in Hollywood, would want to play Frank Davis in this book. So who knows? We'll wait and see if something happens.
Well,
It'd be great for Hot Springs, I think.
it would. It would. I mean, between you and 2020's The Vapors, I mean, there's been a lot of attention in the book world on our Hot Springs history. So thank you and Dave Hill for being part of that.
Thank you, Paul.
Of course. So anything else going on in your world that you'd like to share?
Nothing right now that I can think of. I just, like I said, tomorrow I got to get up and go from my bedroom down to the other end of the study and start working on the second printing, get everything ready and get that sent to my editor. So that's my world for right now, Paul.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
I'm very busy. So I'll share a couple of events we have coming up here at the library, including one this Friday, and this one is in person.
Yeah.
And this features Beth Burkell, as an author who talks about the Maud Crawford mystery from 1957 in Camden. She is on tour across a few Arkansas cities, and she'll be here 6 p.m. in person to talk about her newest book about the Maud Crawford case, which we do have a copy here at the library, and she will have some to sell and sign this Friday. Unfortunately, that program will not have a virtual option, but we would like to see you come and support that event and hear a totally different true crime take. And one other program, this one's on the fun end of the spectrum, has nothing to do with true crime or murders, but it is about the past, a little more recent. If I can get the poster loaded here, or I might just hold one up. Oh, there it goes. On Friday, June 17th, we're going to have, this is for adults, an 80s theme, Back from the Future prom. We're going to have a DJ with 80s music, and we encourage everyone to dress up, bring your big hair and all your 80s themed clothes, and just have a good time. All right. So thank you once again, Biddy, and everyone for watching. And
thank you, Paul. Thank you, everybody, for listening, coming tonight.
Yes, and this presentation is recorded, so it's available immediately afterwards for you to share, or if you tuned in late, if you want to go back and watch the beginning on Facebook and YouTube. So please share this with anyone who might be interested. And Biddy, remind them where they can find your book for sale.
Barnes & Nobles, Books A Million, Target, Amazon, here at the library.
Yeah, we have a long list. We have several copies and a long list. Right. So,
and the Historical Society will be selling them also, and those will come signed. And I can personalize them if you wish, but all of the Historical Society's books that they'll be selling of mine up there will be signed.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you once again, and everyone, take care. Be safe out there. Thank you, Biddy.
Thank you, Paul.